on today and get your calendars out. I have a 3-lesson series on Gabriel's Gmail calendar. And I don't think that Gabriel actually used Gmail, but we all do, a lot of us do, so I just thought it would be interesting to throw that word within that word Gabriel. Okay, let's pray and ask the presence of the Lord here today. Jesus, we love you, God. We ask you, Jesus, to be part of our Bible study today. Lord, I pray, anoint our minds and help us to understand your appointed times, your festivals, your calendar. And God, we just give you all the glory in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, sounds like time to get to the PowerPoint. Here we are at the PowerPoint. You'll notice there's a date, January 8th, 2017. And at the third lesson, I will explain this particular date. You're going to want to learn everything in between or you won't understand it. So January 8th, 2017, which is coming up in a few short weeks, we need to understand that date. But I'm going to talk today about some of the foundational things we need to know to understand Gabriel's Gmail calendar. This is lesson 1 of 3. And here's the first idea. Gabriel's Gmail calendar is the one prophecy that Daniel was not given the interpretation for. This is the chapter, Daniel chapter 12. You will need to read that chapter on your own, but this is the only prophecy Daniel was not given the interpretation for. Now there's a very good reason why Daniel could not understand this prophecy. We're going to learn that near the end of this particular study. Let's read just a couple verses, and we're going to read out of the ESV, and the reason I'm reading out of the ESV will become clear here in just a second. Daniel 12:1 says, "At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been, since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered or saved, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame, and everlasting contempt or judgment." This looks like it's merging Israel and the church together, which it is actually. And so we see here that the ESV version incorporates the findings of the oldest Old Testament manuscripts, the Dead Sea Scrolls of Qumran. And the reason that's why we're using it is for a very specific reason, which will become apparent here in the next slide or so. So, let's take a look at the sons of God versus the sons of Israel in the Song of Moses. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is we have to have an understanding is that God works through the divine council. The divine council are the sons of God, not the sons of Israel. Now, I'm going to read out of Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9 in the Jerusalem Bible. This is the Masoretic Text Bible. "When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the children of men, he set the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel." Do you see that? Sons of Israel. "For the portion of the Lord is his people, Jacob the lot of his inheritance." What we're seeing here is that God divided the nations according to the sons of God. He divided them into 70. That's going to become apparent here. Now notice what the ESV does, because it now was written after the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and of course this is based on the Masoretic text. It says, "When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind," that's the 70 nations that he divided after the Tower of Babel. That's what that's referring to. "He fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob or Israel, his allotted heritage." That comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls version of Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9, which is older than the Masoretic text. Now, who are the sons of God? We find that they are found in Job chapter 2 and Job chapter 38. They're a divine council of 70 angelic rulers or princes. They're a heavenly Sanhedrin. Recall the Sanhedrin in Israel was comprised of 70 elders. They're given domain based upon the 70 languages that were initially divided at the Tower of Babel according to the Table of Nations. If you read Genesis 10 through Genesis 11, you'll find that there are 70 nations and that these nations were divided among the sons of God, these princes. And God is a delegator. God gives domain to people. We know that from the gifts of the Spirit. We know that from the fivefold ministry. And there's nothing different here in the heavenlies. God divides the nations according to these princes. This is going to become very apparent. Now this is found in the Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32, which has the entire prophecy of Israel's duration. Is found in Deuteronomy 32. And you'll notice the difference between the Masoretic text, where it says sons of Israel, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where it says sons of God. I hope you see that difference between the two versions. And of course, we're going with the Dead Sea Scrolls today because it's much older. It's over 1,000 years older than the Masoretic text. And they need to correct their Bibles. And so the King James Version will have the sons of Adam or the sons of Israel, and of course here we've got the sons of God, meaning the angelic council, in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I just wanted to point that out to you today. And why is this important? The angelic princes appear again in the book of Daniel, specifically and prominently in the book of Daniel, like it does in the book of Job. And there's a man in white linen, possibly Gabriel. We think that maybe is who it is. Let's read Daniel 10, 13 through 14 in the ESV, and 20 through 21, where it talks about these princes. And Gabriel tells Daniel, or the man in white linen tells him, the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. For I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. So here we see a reference to the prince of Persia and Michael, the chief prince. And we see it again in verses 20 through 21. Then he said, you know why I've come to you, but now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. When I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince. Now this particular passage of Scripture is fascinating in the fact that it shows that the prince of Persia was reigning during the time of Daniel when he got these prophecies. We know that the Babylonians were conquered by Cyrus the Medo, the kings of Persia. And this prince of Persia, this angelic being, was reigning at that time over Babylon, the world empire. And then, of course, when Alexander the Great came, Alexander the Greek is a proper word as well, or phrase. He's the prince of Greece. We see the prince of Greece then takes over. And so we see that these princes become prominent when they take over. And so these particular prophecies are related to Persia and Greece as it relates to Israel. That's what he says here. But there's a book here called the Book of Truth. This is a heavenly book that seems to have God's appointments, God's calendar in it. And that's what we're interested in this Bible study, these three lessons. So, look at Revelation 12, 7 through 9, confirms all this. It says, now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels were fighting against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back. But the dragon was defeated. There was no longer any place for them in heaven. The dragon was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And of course, we believe that this particular war occurred at the time that Jesus died on the cross. That's when we believe that Satan was cast down to the earth. This is found in Revelation 12. But so we see that these angelic princes from the divine council who originally had some domain, we see that they are fighting against the chief prince, Michael. And so we see that these are the fallen princes that follow the third of the stars that followed Satan. And those are adversaries. Now, let's move on here. This war in heaven, we talked about, the princes were identified for Israel, Persia, and Greece. Israel is God's heritage, his portion. And Michael seems to be the angel of the Lord, the guardian ruler, the captain of the Lord's host. He's possibly the man of war Joshua met in Joshua 5, 13 through 15, who had his hand on the sword. Gabriel, however, is the messenger of the Lord. He's not a warrior, he's a messenger. He reveals God's foreknowledge, this book of truth, the calendar of appointed times. He reveals it to men. That seems to be what he does. And we see that here in Daniel 8, 16 through 19. I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai River, and it called, and it says, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So Gabriel came near where I stood. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation. He's talking about the punishment of Israel, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. Of course, this particular prophecy is talking about the end of the desecration of the temple, etc. And then we see again, while I was speaking and praying, this is in Daniel 9, 20 through 23, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the first, Daniel 8, he came to me, and he made me understand, speaking with me, and he said, "O Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding. A word went out, and I have come to tell it to you, for you are greatly loved." So we see that Gabriel's ministry is to give insight, understanding. He is an angel of light. He illuminates men's minds to understand the book of truth, the vision that God wants to show us about the calendar of appointed times. And so this calendar is very important to God. So let's look at the summary, the 10 points, the 10 major points of the Daniel 12 prophecy, which I want you to read that entire thing on your own. And it's specific to Israel. First, we see that Michael stands up, which means he's going to war. The second thing about this prophecy, it's a time of unparalleled trouble for Israel. So Daniel 12 is not a prophecy about post-Babylon in the sense before Jesus came. This appears to be a very end-of-time prophecy. And we'll see that in the next point, that the rapture, the resurrection of the church is noted, that people are resurrected, and of course we know that happens immediately before the return of the Lord. And so we know that Daniel 12 is about Israel in the latter days of the church. So he also refers to the book of life will contain the names of Israel who enter into the new covenant during a last great revival. This is referred to by the angel that is talking to Daniel, that's trying to make him understand. But Daniel is not going to understand this particular prophecy, Daniel chapter 12. Notice the book of life is different than the book of truth. Now there's some interesting days here that we're going to go over in this prophecy that in order to understand this prophecy, Daniel would have had to have an understanding of the lunar calendar, which did not come into Israel's priestly ministry until after they left Babylon. So the angel talks about 1,260 days, 3.5 years. It's mentioned as the duration of the time of trouble, or we would call this the Great Tribulation. Then he mentions 1,290 days. He's mentioned this as the duration of the abomination of desolation. That would be, in the New Testament, the reign of the Antichrist that is to come, and he will reign over Israel during that time. And so the question is, why is 1260 different than 1290? And unless you had an understanding of the Babylonian calendar, which Daniel did not, you would not be able to figure this out. We're going to talk about a possibility of that today for you to consider. Then there's 1,335 days as mentioned as the watching time for blessing. We will talk about that next session, next lesson, but not today. We're going to focus on these two right here today. So the angel then tells Daniel that the prophecy is sealed, it's unrevealed until the appointed time of the end. And that is our day. That Daniel would not be able to understand this. And the reason I believe that Daniel would not be able to understand this is because he had no view of how the Babylonian calendar would be incorporated into Second Temple worship when they rebuilt the temple in 516 BC. And then during the time of the Maccabees, 175 BC, this lunar calendar of the Babylonians was strongly incorporated into temple worship. And we're going to find out that that's the reason for 1260 versus 1290. So the angel tells Daniel that righteous ones who shine will have the prophecy revealed to them. And of course, it's talking that some people will be chosen to reveal the prophecy of Daniel chapter 12. And then the man in linen, he raises one hand, the right hand, and he swears an oath. Now this indicates that this chapter, Daniel 12, is a covenant given to Daniel and to Israel. This is an angelic covenant. The angel swears. This is not Abraham raising his hand. This is not Moses raising his hand. This is an angelic covenant that this prophecy will be revealed and it will come to pass for Israel. Those are the 10 things that I saw in Daniel 12. You probably can see a few other things. Go ahead and write me about them. I'd be happy to hear your point of view. So, 1260, 1290, 1335. Untangling, we have to untangle the calendar ideas. And to do that, we're going to have to understand that there were two calendars used in Second Temple Judaism. When I say Second Temple, when they came back in 520 BC and rebuilt the temple until the time of the Maccabees, we have to understand that they incorporated two calendars. And one is a religious calendar, which is lunar synchronized, and one is an agricultural calendar, also known as the solar calendar, and that's synchronized according to the vernal equinox, which is usually March 20th or March 21st. That's how men synchronize when the Earth has made one complete revolution around the sun. So, the lunar calendar, their months are 29.530588 days long. That is 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, 2.8 seconds. That's the amount of time it takes for the moon to make one revolution about the Earth. And because it's not an even number, it's only not an even number because we've chosen minutes, days, and seconds according to our own divisions to create a calendar, but it requires leap year adjustments to synchronize this particular calendar, the lunar calendar, to our Gregorian calendar. It requires leap year adjustments. In fact, that's exactly what happened to Israel, to the Babylonians. Everybody has leap year adjustments. That the rotation of the planet around the sun and the moon around the earth do not exactly happen at the same time every day. And of course, when new moons appear, they do not happen on the same day. There's always this half a day thing that's missing. So the lunar calendar is always tied to new moons. That's the time it takes the moon to make one revolution around the earth. And lunar months are tied to God's festivals. Lunar months are tied to God's festivals because they always are counted from a new moon, and that's scriptural. These are appointed times of worship. So a lunar month is also called modernly a synodic month or a lunation. So if I use those words, synodic or lunation, it's referring to a lunar month, 29.530588. Lunar months are tied to God's festivals. Now, the lunar calendar has to be adjusted to the solar calendar. So solar calendar months are 30.4375 days long if we use a 365.25 day in a year, and it's equally divided by 12. Now, we know that we have leap years in the Gregorian calendar. There are 12.4 lunar months in a solar year. So lunar months don't exactly divide into a solar year by 12. It's always off and has to be adjusted with a leap period to readjust the lunar calendar to the solar calendar. And of course, we have a leap day on February 29th once every 4 years in the Gregorian calendar to adjust our calendar to the solar, to get it resynchronized. We do that every 4 years. So the lunar calendar, every 19 years, the lunar calendar would naturally synchronize with the solar calendar. That's an important fact. So when the Hebrews, the rabbis of the Maccabean period, 175 BC, when they create their calendar, and they've totally gone lunar, and that's because they were assimilated to Babylon. So when they came out of Babylon, between the Greeks and the Babylonians used a lunar calendar. The Hebrews, the Jews that returned and rebuilt the temple by 175 BC, they had completely adopted the lunar calendar of the Babylonians, of the Greeks. And that's why even today, if you look at a rabbinical calendar with Hebrew months, we're going to go over that, you'll see that they adopted even the Babylonian names for their months. Prior to this, they just used month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now they used the Babylonian names for their calendar. And we're going to talk about these issues here, and it's going to help us understand what Daniel could not understand. So prior to Babylon, Israel synchronized the lunar, solar calendars on the vernal equinox every 7 years. So in other words, they would have one leap time on the 7th year when the land would lay fallow. Every 7th year was a sabbatical year, and they would simply add a few days at the end of their calendar to readjust to the vernal equinox, which is normally March 20th or 21st. Recall, the vernal equinox is when you have 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness. And there was a way that the Hebrews did this, and I'm going to show it to you here in just a second. So, here's the lunar calendar that the Jews use today. And of course, this calendar is referred to throughout the New Testament. So there's a mixture of lunar and solar all the time. We need to understand that these calendars emerge. This is why Daniel didn't understand the Daniel chapter 12 prophecy, because he did not have a lunar calendar. Here you see the Gregorian calendar, that's us in the middle. Here you see the lunar calendar that they got from Babylon, and you can see the festivals that they have according to the lunar, and you'll see that. And this calendar has to be adjusted constantly because of the 29.4 lunar days in a solar month. So there we go. Here's the next one. Here you can stop this if you want to look at those festivals in detail that they currently have. This is their current festival calendar. And I want to draw your attention to Adar over here. Adar. When they would do a leap month, they would add 30 days every 2 or 3 years to their calendar to get closer to the solar calendar. They would add a month called Adar 2. So Adar 1 happened on years where they had a 12-month lunar calendar, and their days, they always had 29 or 30 days in each lunar month. But on a leap year, they would add 30 days every second or third year. And of course, the sequence of those years would be alternating between 2 and 3 years, like piano keys, the black keys on a piano, until you get to the 19th year when it naturally synchronizes with the solar calendar at the vernal equinox. So I want to point out that they would add a 13th month, that's why it says 12 or 13 here, called Adar 2 to do a calendar adjustment according to the Babylonian lunar calendar that they came out of Babylon with. Now, here's what's interesting. In Solomon's time, which was pre-Babylon, and in the time of Moses, the way that they would reset the calendar is they would do it every 7 years when the vernal equinox, the sun would shine through this gate, and it would perfectly hit the doors of the temple. Then they knew when the sun rose over the Mount of Olives, and the light came through this gate, it would come all the way through these gates here and hit the temple door. That's how they synchronized their lunar calendar, or let's call it the Sabbath calendar. Every 7 years they would synchronize their calendar because they were losing. They had a 364, 52-week day year, and they would lose 1.25 days. And for 7 years, then they would add 8 days at the end of the year on the 7th, the sabbatical year. So I hope you understand that. So this is how they did it before they went into Babylon. So they would adjust their calendar on sabbatical years. But when they came out of Babylon, they had a lunar calendar completely synchronized with the Greek Babylonian calendar, and that's what they use today. And that's why Daniel was confused by Daniel chapter 12 when he was given that, but it's to be revealed in the end time. That's what we're talking about today. So notice that the azimuth of the sun, notice the sun makes paths through the sky. That's called the ecliptic path. And exactly on March 20th, 21st, the vernal equinox, that sun would shine, that light would come through this wall, through this wall, through this wall, and hit the temple door perfectly. And on the sabbatical year, they would adjust the calendar back. Their 52-week calendar, 364 days, they would adjust it back to the vernal equinox and reset the calendar, and that would be their Jubilee time, the Jubilee calendar. And that would be a time of letting the land lie fallow. Now notice, Jubilee is on the 49th year, the Sabbath of Sabbaths. And so the whole point is that they use these things for resetting their calendar. And so this is going to become interesting to us because God's going to give us timing. And that's what we want to understand here, what the timing is according to this prophecy. So we want to untangle 1260, 1290, 1335 in Daniel chapter 12, because God says that this can be understood in the end time to those that shine. So Daniel didn't understand the calendar. I explained that the Babylonian lunar calendar had not become assimilated into the temple calendar of the priests, but when they came out of Babylon, they even named their months as the Babylonians did, according to lunar synchronizations. And every 2 or 3 years, a 30-day month is added to the lunar calendar to bring a near alignment with the vernal equinox. That would be the month Adar 2. They would add a 13th month. And then every 19 years, the lunar solar calendar is synchronized automatically by themselves. So the big disagreement between the Zadokite priests of Qumran, where we find the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Maccabean priests of the 175 BC was the calendar. That was their biggest disagreement, was which calendar should they be using. So 30 days are added to 1260 in a leap year adjustment. Thus, 1260 ends at the end of a 1290 calendar, Adar 2. Okay, now you have seen why 1260 and 1290 are mentioned in Daniel 12, because now we've added a second month. Now, God is not telling him that these are two separate days. In fact, the 1260 and the 1290 end exactly on the same day. But what God is telling us in Daniel 12 is that this is a lunar month that has an Adar 2. That allows us to narrow down the reign of the Antichrist and the tribulation according to a lunar calendar. Think of those black keys on the piano. Every 2 or 3 keys, you have to adjust the calendar by adding a second month, a 13th month. For the month of, we would call it December, they called it Adar. So you'd have a 13-month year. And so that's what God is telling us, is that, and Daniel couldn't understand that because the lunar calendar was not yet being used in the temple. But now the rabbis use it, and so God's telling us. That's why we can understand it. So the Qumran calendar foundation was the solar year. It was divided into 52 weeks, 364 days, 91 days per quarter, with a 1.25 remainder. Okay? So like Moses and Solomon, before them, the Zadokites of Qumran, every 7 years was a sabbatical year to agree with the vernal equinox of March 20th and 21st. Now, keep in mind, the land was to remain fallow during a sabbatical year. So this leap adjustment, this calendar synchronization, was accomplished by adding days to the 12th month on the sabbatical year. And I believe that they either added 8 days at the end of 7 years, or they added 7 days each year, and they got to the Jubilee year and added 2 periods of 7 days and adjusted it that way. We're not really sure. It's very possible that the Jubilee was another calendar adjustment. That would be the 49th year. Okay, you're probably really confused by now, but that's where we're going to stop with Gabriel's Gmail calendar this session. You have to understand this before we go into what we're going to learn next week about the 13th, 35th day, and this will all make sense, and then we're going to talk in the third lesson about January 8th, 2017, and that's where we'll go from there. So I hope you enjoyed today's study. It's the calendar. It's a little bit long, but you're going to need to maybe go back and check it out again and go through it and read Daniel chapter 12, and then we'll progress next week or the next session on another edition of 153greatfish.website. God bless your day.